Hi, I'm Judith. I'm a Canadian and I'm over 80 years old. And the purpose of this channel, Jam Today, Judith's Point of View, is to share with you the things that I've learned over the years from my life, and in the hope that they will help you to create a happy and successful and fulfilling life. Um, so if any of this is helpful to you, please like, subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. So it'll get out to more people. Okay, so today we're going to talk about decisions, and this is part 2 of the decision video. I did one previously that should have come out. This will be a week. This one will be out a week after the first one. And in the first one, I talked about 3 different kinds of decisions. There are simple decisions, consequential decisions, and complicated decisions. I also talked about the fact that all of those decisions, it's really important to have a mixture of left brain and right brain pondering going on in there. Left brain being logical, rational, fact-based, research-based, risk assessment, all that kind of stuff. Right brain being intuitive, gut feel, your feelings, creativeness, the degree of excitement that it gives you and the degree of fear that it gives you. I'll talk about more about fear later. And ideally, a decision is made on a blend of those. And some decisions, really, if the stakes are not high, it doesn't really matter a lot whether you get both things involved, both parts of you involved. And some people are much more inclined to lean on their left brain and their logical, analytical side. And some people, I'm one of them, more inclined to look at the right-hand side. For me, a decision has to sit right in my gut. And I am sometimes guilty, and I'll talk in a minute about this, not doing enough research. And then I make bad decisions. But so we have different types of decisions, and presumably a simple decision would take less time to figure out, even to research and to check your feelings about, than a consequential decision. Oh, that's not always true for reasons I'll talk about another time. Because sometimes you can be really ready for a decision subconsciously before something happens, and then it does. So I'll talk about that later. But so usually a simple decision happens faster than a consequential decision. Consequential decisions may happen faster than a complicated decision. Maybe not. You may be able to do them in about the same amount of time. The point is to have an appropriate amount of time to get both sides involved. And so the danger on the one hand is that you postpone the decision too long. You take too long to make the decision, or you don't make it at all because you get paralyzed either by the left brain analytical things or by the right brain conflicting feelings of some kind, or not being able to get in touch with your feelings, and so you don't know what to do. So you may just postpone a decision too long. The other danger is that you move too fast into a decision. This can happen either because you don't consult the other side, you do it all on emotion and you don't consult the logical side, or you do it all on logic and you don't consult the emotional side, or it can happen because the stress of having to be in uncertain indecision mode is just so strong that you'll make any decision in order to be relieved of that pressure. And that's something to be aware of. So you want a left brain, right brain, a reasonable amount of time. It helps if you give yourself a reasonable amount of time and you say, I will make that decision by a certain day, or I'll make that decision by a certain hour, or I will make that decision within a number of months. And even if you go a bit over, it helps you move a little faster toward that decision. I talked in the last video about my grandson, whom I'm talking to, about a decision whether or not what way he should go about becoming a pilot. what path or possible paths he has so that he can make a good decision about that. And one of the factors there is that if he wants to go to university to do that, and there is a university in Canada that offers this in Toronto, or out of Toronto, um, he won't have time to make that decision. We're now in June of 2026. He won't have time to make that decision before September. It only starts in September. So we're looking at maybe him making a decision by the following September as to whether he wants to do that course of action or not. Otherwise, he's looking at another year, and every year that goes by is a year where he is on a very slow path to becoming a pilot. And if he decides absolutely, and also he'll get stopped by the fact that, I don't know, you can't enter that college if you have more training than your private pilot license. So if he gets that this year, which he's likely to do, then he'd need to make the decision whether he's going to do that university thing or not before he makes it impossible for him to do it. So you can have a time limit like that. So I talked a little bit about fear. Rushing into a decision. So I have been making some pretty bad decisions lately. Now, luckily, they are simple decisions. They are not consequential or complicated decisions. But I'm on Facebook, and on Facebook, there are all these ads that come up, and they come up for products and for various kinds of products. And I've been just buying some of them impulsively and way too fast. And then I get them and I'm not happy with them. And then I waste money, and then it's hard to return them. Sometimes I can return them, sometimes I can't. I did a whole thing on grounding sheets recently. I'm still holding out hope for the grounding sheets working, but don't know. I think I may have misspent my money. And I tried two different types, 2 different brands. I mean, and they're not cheap. What was my latest one? Oh, this past week, I decided that my running shoes were not serving me well. I had bought them to do the walk in the Camino de Santiago a few years ago, when I was 78, I think. And I did them, but I didn't even like them. I kicked them off most days after a couple of hours and put on walking sandals. And one of the things was that they were Hokas. And Hokas have all different styles, but this style had a very curved bottom. And I was walking, not running, and it tilted me forward the whole time. So I went out walking with my friends last Sunday, and they noticed that I was walking. My posture was kind of strange. I was leaning forward, and that was to keep my balance because these things were throwing me off balance, and sometimes it made me stagger. So I just gave them away. They went to a friend who knows someone who does things for the homeless, and away they went. And I do have another pair of running shoes that I can wear. In fact, I have 2 pairs of a pair of walking shoes and a pair of running shoes, and I can wear those. The running shoes are old, so I might want to replace them, but I'm going to try the walking shoes. But meanwhile, I saw this ad for barefoot shoes. I thought, oh, barefoot shoes. Oh, that's interesting. And I have ordered, get this, 3 pairs of barefoot shoes. Now that's just stupid. I don't even know if I like them. Because I ordered on impulse. I saw them and I ordered 1 pair on impulse, and they were very cheap. They weren't expensive. I think $39 or something in free shipping. So maybe a little more with tax. And then I saw an ad where you got 2 for the price of 1, and they looked like a better quality, and they came with some insoles in them. So I ordered those 2. So now they haven't come yet. I'm going to have 3 pairs of barefoot shoes coming. Now that's just dumb. It's a dumb use of my money. But the fact is, I'm not going to go broke because of it. And the second thing is, if I end up not even returning them, but just giving them away, oh, well, I just wasted some money and a little bit of time. I didn't really hurt anything terrible. I am trying to remind myself before I buy things, before I buy supplements, before I buy things, especially things online, because they're way higher priced, to do some research, to go and look at things. I've been thinking about another product, a weigh scale, and I've been looking at that. And so I joined a couple of Facebook groups where the users of that scale talk about it. And oh gosh, the reviews aren't very great, so I've decided not to buy that. So there's a case where, doing a little bit of research, getting some actual facts, the left brain side, it is helping me to make a better decision. I already have a scale that does almost everything that this other scale would do. So, you know, um, so if you're only making mistakes on simple decisions, good, that's great. If, on the other hand, you're making decisions about complicated decisions, consequential decisions or complicated decisions, and you're making them too fast without properly researching them, or just running with your feelings, or furthermore, or otherwise not checking in with yourself about them because you just want the decision to be over, then you could really cause some difficulty. And it may not be the most horrible thing that ever happened to you. I remember, years ago, I shouldn't tell stories about my family, but years ago, and one of my stepdaughters didn't know what she wanted to do after high school, and she'd taken a gap year, and she didn't know. She always wanted to be a plastic surgeon, but somehow by then she wasn't talking about those things. And I don't know, one day I was just throwing out ideas, and I said, what about an interior designer? You're pretty good at, drawing and things, and what about an interior designer? She went, oh, yeah. And she decided to do that, just on the spur of the moment, like that. No research, no further thinking about it. And honestly, at that point, I was stupid enough not to counsel her to do more thinking about it. I was glad she'd chosen something. And she went ahead and she applied, and she actually did 2 years in college of a 3-year course. And in the first year, she quite enjoyed it and she was quite good at it. In the second year, she discovered it wasn't for her, that there were aspects of it that did not fit her. And so she had to figure out something else to do, which she then, moved on to doing. So that 2 years wasn't wasted. No education is ever wasted, but it wasn't the most direct path toward a career. So I hope she forgives me for telling this story, but I'm not naming her. And hopefully I stay anonymous enough that nobody figures out who she is. But it wasn't, it was a mistake made by a 17-year-old or an 18-year-old. It wasn't, we've all made mistakes like that, I think, I talked in another video about where I went to teach in an open concept ungraded high school, and that didn't turn out very well. I didn't research that. I didn't know myself well enough to know, and she didn't know herself well enough to know. So we make those mistakes. Most of the time, they do not, they're not life or death. They cause us some delays and some heartache and some shame, maybe, or some whatever, but they're not awful. So that's one thing. Just try to figure out, do your research, do the best thing. Try not to either procrastinate too long and never make the decision, or jump into it too fast. I want to talk a little bit also about fear. I've decided I'm going to talk about the times when it looks like you've jumped too fast, but you really haven't. I'll talk about that in a separate video because I really want to elaborate on that one and that story. But talking about fear. Fear is something that often holds us up from making a decision or causes us to make the wrong decision. And often it's fear of taking a risk. Now, if it's, I don't like going on roller coasters, and I went on one at Disney World once and said, if I hate this, I'll never go on one again. I don't ever have to go on one again. I just don't enjoy them. They fill me with no thrill at all. I don't like fast adrenaline. So my decision has been not to ever go on one again. If your decision is your fear of, like, I'm not going to ever bungee jump because I'm too scared of heights for that. But it's not consequential, so it doesn't matter if I decide that I'm not going to do it. Maybe I'm missing out on some thrill, but I don't care. But I know people who have not made decisions or have decided not to do a certain thing. Let's say an opportunity presents itself to them, and they've decided not to do that because they're afraid. I suppose that when we decided, I'm going to talk in a different video about our decision to move to France and live there for 2 years back in the 1990s. I want to talk about it from a different perspective, but I will talk about it in terms of readiness for making a decision. But we had lots of people afterwards that said, "How can you do that? Oh my God, I would be too scared to leave income for 2 years." And well, we thought it was only 1 year at the time, but to just jump off that ladder for a couple of years, I would be too afraid that I wouldn't get work when I got back. I'd be too afraid of spending my RSPs and my savings, which is what we did. Um, I would be able to do that. And if that's you, then I guess you should listen to that fear and not take that risk. But oh my gosh, I wouldn't have traded that experience for the world. And so for me to be a cautious risk taker is more important. I want to be a cautious risk taker. I try to get the facts. I try to look at it, and I think, and I try not to think about the cost of it. I try not to think about the budget implications. Now, are there things that I could never afford to do? Of course there are. But on the whole, I try not to think about the implications of it, because the money thing can just warp what you really want to do. So I say to my grandson, if in this figuring out whether you want to do the university thing or not, let's not talk about the cost yet. Just assume that your grandma Juju, have won a lottery and the money is all there. And then we'll worry about the cost issue later if that's something you really want to do. We'll try to figure that out if it's something you really want to do. And if then the cost becomes an insurmountable barrier, then all right. But let's not make cost the reason for not looking into the possibility of doing something that you would like to do. I feel the same way about the other thing I talked about in that video about when I went to have surgery, radiation in Stockholm, Switzerland, for a tumor. That radiation was going to cost us $25,000 Canadian, $20,000 for the radiation and $5,000 to go to Sweden and come back. We were going to stop in England and see relatives on the way, because if you're going to go that far, you may as well, spend another couple of days in another country and see your relatives. But yeah, $25,000. That wasn't trivial in 1992. That wasn't trivial then. And we didn't have it in the bank. We didn't have it in investments. We had a house and we had a mortgage, and that's how we ultimately did it. We took $25,000 out of the mortgage, so that we increased our mortgage in order to do it. And we were fortunate. I feel very grateful that we had a house that had enough value that we could do that. It might have been an insurmountable issue had that not been possible. But while I was trying to figure out the decision, I did not think about whether we could afford it or not, or how we would manage to pay for it. And I think that can be wise, because I really believe that the universe has a way of making things possible that you think were impossible. And I got lots of stories in my life about how that has happened. So the dollar side, try not to let it, hold you back too much. And also see if try to see the possible positive things about what might happen if you make a certain decision, as opposed to just the risks. What amazing things could happen if we moved to France, versus how risky was it? And there were people who, when we did that, said, "Oh my gosh, the person who, is going to move into your house might steal everything in your house, or this might be a scam offer," or, there was a lot of fear and trepidation among some of our relatives and friends about it. We didn't have that fear at all, and it turned out that there was no reason for any of that fear. So decisions, think about them, try to do the research, try to categorize them. Is this a simple decision? Is it a consequential decision? Is it a complicated decision? If it's a complicated decision, if there's a lot of guilt involved, or there are no good choices, or every choice is an unhappy choice in some way, which it could be. Let's take leaving a marriage. That could be you know, it's a risky thing to do. It can be a scary thing to do. It can be, I've been so lucky I haven't had to make that decision. I have left relationships, but they were like boyfriends. So, but, you know, the effect on your children, especially, you know, if you've been married a long time and you have kids, like, there may be that you know in your heart that this is the right thing, but there are a lot of other reasons to stay. It may be totally clear to you, and it may just be a consequential decision, not a complicated one. But if it is a complicated one where you're really, really torn, then, uh, you know, you sit with as long as you can unless the situation is urgent. You try to think, under what conditions could I make that decision to go, or under what conditions will I make that decision to stay? And it takes time. Sometimes it takes a lot of time to filter through, and I wouldn't want you to rush that, because that's too important. But if it's like a parent who needs care of some kind, you have to decide: are you bringing them home to care for them, and you're going to be the caregiver, or are you going to hire help into their house and can they afford that, or are you going to put them in some kind of a care situation? Oh boy, that may need to be made relatively quickly, not just drag on for years, because it may not be safe for them where they are and how they are. And you can try interim steps. You know, you can do what you can to ameliorate. You can try something on a trial basis. When I was young, my grandmother came to live with us for a year. My paternal grandmother came from British Columbia to live with us for a year. She'd been widowed several years before. And I don't know, because I was only 13, I guess, 12 or 13. I don't know what the reasoning was that went into it, but I know it only lasted a year. And there were no big fights, there were no big squabbles, there were nothing, you know, some horrible thing, but I know it just didn't work out. It did not work out. She wasn't very happy. My parents weren't really happy with it. And she moved back to British Columbia and lived alone again, where she had another son and support that way. So you can try something, and if it doesn't work, you can maybe do something else. That's another possibility, is to try interim things. Okay, so I think I've covered that. I've talked about timing. I've talked about right brain, left brain. I've talked about fear. I've talked about money. I will talk in another video about decisions that appear rash but really are not, and our experience with that. So until next time, please like and subscribe. Please, yeah, I'd really love to know what other situations you found, what decisions you found. Oh, I have one more thing. Sorry, squirrel brain. So I didn't talk about the fact of decision making when you're making decisions with a partner, and then for some reason your partner isn't there. In this case, my husband died and he wasn't there. That changes the way you make decisions. Conversely, it would be the other way around. If you're used to making decisions on your own all the time, and then you acquire a partner, you got to learn a new way of making decisions, the role that you both play in making joint decisions. So there's a whole thing there. So my experience was, I was going to talk about this likely, and I may mention it again if I'm talking about grief and widowhood in some series of videos, because I do want to do some of those. But my experience was, Dan died in 2005, and about a year later, the dishwasher went fluey, and I needed a new dishwasher. And so I did my research. I looked at various brands. I looked at whatever, and I bought a dishwasher. And the dishwasher wasn't a good decision. Now, it wasn't a horribly consequential decision, but it was a bit of a consequential decision in that I had a dishwasher that didn't really serve me very well. So I'll tell you what happened. It was a Miele. It was a good brand, and I looked at it, and I found, I figured out what characteristics I thought I needed and wanted, and I looked at it, and I bought it, and it was the right size. It was the right width, and it was the right height, but it was not the same depth that my American-made dishwasher, I forget what brand it was, that it had had. And so it didn't hold as many dishes. And furthermore, it was the tines for where the plates went were very close together. And we had our china, and then the plates that we used were Denby, and they were quite thick, and they curved up at the sides. And so you couldn't stack the Denby in a plate in each of the slots. You had to put them in every other slot so that the water would get in, essentially. And so that dishwasher really never served me well. And then what I realized was that Dan and I had a way of making decisions that I had not taken into account when I bought that dishwasher. My role in our marriage, because I'm a happy, kind of see all the possibilities kind of person, you might have figured that out by now, pretty positive on the most part, pretty happy on the most part. My job was to say, oh, look at this one, look at all the features it has, oh, look at this one, and look at this one, and find all the possibilities. I would just see the realms of possibility, and I would dismiss a few because they didn't have the features that we wanted or whatever, but I would just find all of them, and I would be very excited about each one. And Dan's job, he would look at it and he would say, no, no, no. Until he found one or two or three that fit, and he would say, this one is the right one, or these two are pretty much equal. What one would you prefer, or whatever? And then we would go from there. Similarly, when we went to buy a house, we were in Toronto, I would say, oh, look at this neighborhood. We could buy in this neighborhood. Oh, I like this neighborhood. I like this neighborhood. Dan would say, no. The only neighborhood we are going to buy is this neighborhood. Oh, well, that's really going to restrict us. It's going to be much harder to find a job, to find a house, I would say. But we ended up buying a house in that neighborhood. And it was a really great neighborhood, and we both loved it. So I hadn't realized that in that first round where I bought a dishwasher. And Dan would have seen that. He would have noticed the difference in the depth, and he would have noticed the difference in the tines being separated. He would have seen that, I'm sure, and we wouldn't have bought that dishwasher. So then what happened was that then I got a little scared about making more, even bigger, somewhat consequential, but not hugely consequential decisions. And in the time after he died, so he died in 2005, we had a car. We had one car. It was a Honda, and maybe it was a Honda, and a Honda Civic, and it had belonged to my mom. She had bought it in 1995, so it was 10 years old when he died. We had it about 6 years. She gave it to us when she moved out to British Columbia to get married, and she stopped driving because she wasn't going to drive out there in a big city in Vancouver. She was 85 years old. She said, no, I'm not going to drive anymore. So we had this car for, I don't know, 6 years, I think. I'd have to figure that out, 6 or 7 years. And 6 years. So, but anyway, it was 10 years old, this car. And she hadn't put much mileage on it, but it was starting to be about the time that we would start looking for another car. So we'd been talking about another car, and we had started to save up to buy another car. And a couple of years later, it was really time to get another car. And I went out and I looked at all the cars and looked at what I wanted and whatever, and I narrowed it down to 2. And then I sat on that decision for 2 years. I couldn't make up my mind. I was debating between an Acura sedan, kind of a fancy Honda Civic, basically, and a Toyota RAV4, I think it was, something like that, some kind of SUV. And I was afraid to make that decision. And I was afraid because of the dishwasher thing that I wouldn't get it right. So really, it didn't matter a great deal. Either one would have been perfectly fine. I ended up buying the Acura, but I bought it in 2009. And that 2-year, time frame So the car was 14 years old by the time I got rid of it. It was still running, luckily, because Honda Civics are good cars. But really, that was just delay and procrastination because I was afraid. And I was afraid I couldn't trust myself on the decision-making process. Now, it turned out that I could. And then later, I've made lots of decisions since 2009 of my own. And I, as likely I live with a partner again, and so some decisions we make on our own. But now that we're older, a lot of the decisions, because we keep our money separate, are made separately and still independently because we're both used to that. But certain decisions certainly are mutual. So that was the other thing I wanted to add to to this whole thing. So anyway, meanwhile, until the next one, I'm going to do the next one about what appears to be rash decisions, but really are not. I don't know if I'll do that today or I'll do that another day, but it'll come out again another week past this one at least. And until then, until the next one, please like and subscribe again. And also, please do your best. Do your best to find pleasure, to make good decisions, to do your best to create for yourself, to believe that you can create a happy and successful and fulfilling life. And that I wish for you. Take care.